4. The powers of the stone. I will here explain a few of the many possible uses of the Philosopher's Stone. The possibilities for its use are vast and beyond the imagination of a regular person. However, I will outline the traditional uses. There are two forms of the Philosopher's Stone, the white stone, and the red stone. The white stone transmutes any metal into silver. The red stone is the more powerful and more well-known, and transmutes any metal into gold. Furthermore, know that the making of gold and silver were considered the least desirable effects of the stone. The effects on body and mind have always considered to be worth so much more than the money. It is because the stone makes gold and silver that these were used as currency throughout history, not that the stone makes gold and silver because they have value. Let not him who desires this knowledge for the purpose of procuring wealth and pleasure think that he will ever attain to it. Those, therefore, that desire this art as a means of procuring temporal honor, pleasure, and wealth, are the most foolish of men, and they can never obtain that which they seek at so great an expense of money, time, and trouble, and which fills their hearts, their minds, and all their thoughts. For this reason the sages have expressed a profound contempt for worldly wealth, not as though it were in itself a bad thing, seeing that it is highly commended in Holy Scripture as an excellent gift of God, but because of its vile abuse. They despised it because it seemed to hinder men from following the good and the true, and to introduce a mischievous confusion into their conceptions of right and wrong. The Sophic Hydrolith, or Water Stone of the Wise, by Anonymous, 17th Ken. But now concerning, and chiefly in this our age, the ungodly and accursed gold-making, which hath gotten so much the upper hand, whereby under colour of it, many runagates and roguish people do use great villainies, and cozen and abuse the credit, which is given them. Yea, nowadays men of discretion do hold the transmutation of metals to be the highest point, and fastigium in philosophy, this is all their intent, and desire, and that God would be most esteemed by them, and honoured, which could make great store of gold. And in abundance, the which with unpremeditate prayers, they hope to retain of the all-knowing God, and searcher of all hearts. We therefore do by these presents publicly testify, that the true philosophers are far of another minde, esteeming little the making of gold, which is but a paragon, for besides that they have 1,000 better things. Pharma Fraternitatis, by the Rosicrucians, 1614 AD. If you do not yet understand how and why the stone works, what the active principle is, then this will all sound unbelievable. But once you understand that the stone is simply a concentrated and highly developed form of energy, which is the true nourishment of all things that grow, animals, plants, minerals, etc., then you will not only understand how the stone can perform such a wide range of miracles, but also be able to think up further uses. I will begin with a long quote, which sums up the traditional uses quite well. Then I will continue with a detailed list of uses frequently mentioned in the alchemical literature. I will end with another quote revealing wider and less mentioned uses. In its first state, it appears as an impure earthly body, full of imperfections. It then has an earthly nature, healing all sickness and wounds in the bowels of man, producing good and consuming proud flesh, expelling all stench, and healing generally, inwardly and outwardly. In its second nature, it appears as a watery body, somewhat more beautiful than before, because, although still having its corruptions, its virtue is greater. It is much nearer the truth, and more effective in works. In this form it cures cold and hot fevers and is a specific against poisons, which it drives from heart and lungs, healing the same when injured or wounded, purifying the blood, and, taken 3 times a day, is of great comfort in all diseases. But in its third nature it appears as an aerial body, of an oily nature, almost freed from all imperfections, in which form it does many wondrous works, producing beauty and strength of body, and, a small quantity being taken in the food, preventing melancholy and heating of the gall, increasing the quantity of the blood and seed, so that frequent bleeding becomes necessary. It expands the blood vessels, cures withered limbs, restores strength to the sight, in growing persons removes what is superfluous and makes good defects in the limbs. In its fourth nature it appears in a fiery form. not quite freed from all imperfections, still somewhat watery and not dried enough, wherein it has many virtues, making the old young and reviving those at the point of death. For if to such an one there be given, in wine, a barleycorn's weight of this fire, so that it reach the stomach, it goes to his heart, renewing him at once, driving away all previous moisture and poison, and restoring the natural heat of the liver. Given in small doses to old people, it removes the diseases of age, giving the old young hearts and bodies. Hence it is called the elixir of life. In its fifth and last nature, it appears in a glorified and illuminated form, without defects, shining like gold and silver, wherein it possesses all previous powers and virtues in a higher and more wondrous degree. Here its natural works are taken for miracles. When applied to the roots of dead trees they revive, bringing forth leaves and fruit. A lamp, the oil of which is mingled with this spirit, continues to burn forever without diminution. It converts crystals into the most precious stones of all colors, equal to those from the mines, and does many other incredible wonders which may not be revealed to the unworthy. For it heals all dead and living bodies without other medicine. The Book of the Revelation of Hermes, by Theophrastus Paracelsus, 16th Ken. Use 1. A universal medicine for the body. The red stone is much more powerful than the white stone. A single dose can have a large effect, depending on the strength of the stone and whether it be white or red. However, for a lasting effect the stone should be ingested, eaten, daily, else your body and mind will begin deteriorating again. If ingested it will cure all disease, and in higher concentrations will make an old person healthy and fitter than they were even in their youth. If taken suddenly in high concentration, the body will purge itself of everything unnecessary, which may result in going through a shocking transformation over a couple of weeks, with one's skin peeling off, hair and teeth falling out, then growing back in prime condition. Taken regularly in high concentration, it will be unnecessary to eat, drink, or even breathe. Although these may be done anyway, the body will never grow old. You will heal from wounds extremely quickly, and be unaffected by heat and cold. Prepared as medicine and sweet food, when taken into the mouth it may immediately penetrate the human frame, greatly holding to itself every fleshly thing, increasing, restoring, and nourishing the incorrupt virtue and spirit of life, digesting the crude and undigested, removing the superfluous, making natural water abound, and augmenting, comforting, and inflaming natural heat or fire. The above will be the duty of the true physician and sane philosopher. For thus will he be able to preserve our body from corruption, to retard old age, retain florid youth in full vigor, and, if possible, to perpetuate it, at least to preserve it from death and destruction. Man, the best and most perfect of God's creatures, by Benedictus Figulus, 1607 AD. For a month every day let there be taken of this blessed powder, the quantity of a grain of mustard seed, in white wine or in any other liquor, early in the morning. It is sudorific or causing sweat, if anything be, to be sent forth by the pores. It is laxative, if anything be, to be evacuated by stool. It is diuretic, if anything be, to be driven forth by the passage of urine. But it is never vomitive, as that is altogether contrary to nature. It not only rectifieth man's body but also reneweth the whole man, by the use thereof continued for a few weeks. The Crowning of Nature, by Anonymous, 16th-17th Ken. Our stone is, the golden tree, of whose fruit whosoever eats shall not hunger again. An excellent introduction to the art of alchemy, by Peter Bonus, 14th Ken. Use 2. A universal medicine for the mind. The stone will bring one to their very best and sharpest state of mind. You will be able to learn even faster than as a child, and very easily pick up new languages and learn skills naturally, without making much effort. Arguably the best quality of all is that the stone will release one from sadness, depression and suffering. Therefore also making one kind and caring towards others. Our art frees not only the body, but also the soul from the snares of servitude and bondage. It ennobles the rich, and comfort and relieves the poor. Indeed, it may be said to supply every human want, and to provide a remedy for every form of suffering. The New Pearl of Great Price, by Peter Bonus, 1338 AD. He that has once found this art, can have nothing else in all the world to wish for, than that he may be allowed to serve his God in peace and safety. He will not care for pomp or dazzling outward show. But if he lived 1,000 years, and daily entertained 1,000,000 people, he could never come to want. An open entrance to the closed palace of the king, by an anonymous sage and lover of truth, 1645 AD. Use 3. A universal medicine for the spirit. The stone is a fast track to spiritual enlightenment, and considered by the ancient Indians, Tibetans and Chinese to be the only method to achieve enlightenment without meditation. It is considered by the ancient Chinese Taoists to be the preferred method. With accelerated spiritual growth, and unlimited life energy and qi, the possibilities eventually become limitless and one will be capable of anything. Tan is the supremely priceless valuable medicine of the material body. Successful compounding leads to endless changes. It makes it possible for one to ascend to meet the Chen Sung, true men, and further to solve the problem of Wu Sheng, non-living, by its skillful use. Even if you are able to apprehend the true nature of Buddhism, i.e., to become of a Buddha, you will not be able to avoid giving up your body here and acquiring another body there. What can be better than compounding the great Tan, medicine, at the same time? Then you can overcome Wu Tu, no leak, to become a Chen Zhen, true man, Xian. The doors of Xuen Andine are seldom known by the people. They are really not the nose and the mouth, as some persons think. Even if you practice breathing for years, how can you make the golden Wu, crow, capture the two, rabbit? Wu Chen Pian, Essay on the Understanding of Truth, by Chang Po Tuan, 1078 AD, Chinese. Whoever eats any of the medicines may rise on high or stay in this world according to his desire. On the gold medicine and on the yellow and the white, by Ko Hung, 4th Ken. Chinese. Use 4. A universal medicine for plants. The stone will cause plants to grow extremely quickly and healthily and in any condition. Use 5. A universal medicine for metals. The stone allows any metal to be transmuted into silver, with the white stone, or gold, with the red stone. It is also possible to transmute gold back into the lesser metals. This matter, after having received perfect whiteness, perfect redness and fixation, tinges all imperfect metals into the best silver and gold. The Chemist's Key, by Henry Nollius, 1617 AD. The purer the metals are, and the greater their affinity to our substance, the more easily are they received by the tincture, and the more perfect and rapid is the process of regeneration. For the transformation consists in all that is impure and unsuitable being purged off, and rejected like dross. In the same manner flawed stones can be transmuted into precious diamonds, and common crystal can be so tinged as to become equal to the most precious stones. Moreover, many other things may be done with the tincture which must not be revealed to the wicked world. These virtues of the stone, and others of a like kind, are looked upon as the least important by the sages, and by all Christians on whom God has bestowed this most precious gift. Such men think them vile indeed when compared with the knowledge of God and of his works which is afforded by the stone. The Sophic Hydrolith, or water stone of the wise, by Anonymous, 17th Ken. He, Raymond, was also the first to discover the method of evolving precious stones out of the metallic principles. Nay, he was able, not only to change lead into gold, but he transmuted gold into lead, and thus turned back the course of nature. The New Pearl of Great Price, by Peter Bonus, 1338 AD. Every mercury of metals and minerals may, by successive stages, be raised, through the qualities of all other mercuries, to the excellence of the solar body, and thence also be reduced to the degree and virtue of any metallic body one may choose. A Golden and Blessed Casket of Nature's Marvels, by Benedictus Figulus, 1607 AD. Use 6. A universal medicine for minerals. The stone can be used to grow and develop precious stones and diamonds. Our stone matures all immature precious stones, and brings them to their highest perfection. An explanation of the natural philosopher's tincture, of Paracelsus, by Alexander von Suchten, 16th Ken. Use 7. Malleable glass. The stone can be used to make glass malleable, that is, so you can beat it into shape without it shattering. Our substance is a body containing spirit which makes glass malleable, and turns crystals into carbuncles. A very brief tract concerning the philosophical stone, by an unknown German sage, 15th–17th Ken. Use 8. Unlimited energy. Traditionally, lamps can be made with the stone which burn forever, or at least for thousands of years. Therefore it can also be used to generate an almost unlimited amount of electricity and be used as a power source. I will cover ever-burning lamps in more detail in a later chapter. The stone certainly has some interesting properties, which could make sci-fi technologies possible. Everlasting fire, of which many alchemists boast, the fire used aforetime by the Jews for their burnt offerings, which burnt continually without becoming extinguished, which also was hidden by the prophet Jeremiah before the first destruction of Jerusalem, and afterwards was discovered by Ezra. An explanation of the natural philosopher's tincture, of Paracelsus, by Alexander von Suchten, 16th Ken. Use 9. Creation of life. The stone can be used to grow humans, animals outside of the womb, or create clones. It is possible to make them giants or dwarf them. It is also possible to create hybrids or new species out of different animals, or even animals and answer. This will be covered in more detail in a later chapter, wherein we find many strange effects, as continuing life in him, though divers parts, which you account vital, be perished and taken forth, resuscitating of some that seem dead in appearance, and the like. We try also all poisons, and other medicines upon him, as well of chirurgery as physic. By art likewise we make them greater or smaller than their kind is, and contrariwise dwarf them and stay their growth. We make them more fruitful and bearing than their kind is, and contrariwise barren and not generative. Also we make them differ in color, shape, activity, many ways. We find means to make commixtures and copulations of divers kinds, which have produced many new kinds, and them not barren, as the general opinion is. The New Atlantis, by Francis Bacon, 1627 AD. Finally, we have a further list of usages of the Philosopher's Stone from Francis Bacon's Magnalia Naturae, Praecipue quod jus humanos. Translation: The glorious works of nature, especially in regards to human usages, appended to Bacon's The New Atlantis. The prolongation of life, the restitution of youth in some degree, the retardation of age, the curing of diseases counted incurable, the mitigation of pain, more easy and less loathsome purgings, the increasing of strength and activity, the increasing of ability to suffer torture or pain, the altering of complexions, and fatness and leanness, the altering of statures, the altering of features, the increasing and exalting of the intellectual parts, versions of bodies into other bodies, making of new species, transplanting of one species into another, instruments of destruction, as of war and poison, exhilaration of the spirits, and putting them in good disposition, force of the imagination, either upon another body, or upon the body itself, acceleration of time in maturations, acceleration of time in clarifications, acceleration of putrefaction, acceleration of decoction, acceleration of germination, making rich composts for the earth, impressions of the air, and raising of tempests, great alteration, as in induration, immolition, and sea, turning crude and watery substances into oily and unctuous substances, drawing of new foods out of substances not now in use, making new threads for apparel, and new stuffs, such as paper, glass, and sea. Natural divinations, deceptions of the senses, greater pleasures of the senses, artificial minerals and cements. Magnalia Naturae, Praecipue quod jus humanos, by Francis Bacon, 1627 AD. 5. Disbelief. Doubt is the first stage of knowledge. A subtle allegory concerning the secrets of alchemy, by Michael Mayer, 1617 AD. The art of alchemy has been a secret since the beginning of our recorded history, and so there have always been many people who simply don't believe in it. This is of course made worse by the obscure way in which the alchemical books are written and the fact that the alchemists have wanted to remain hidden, and so never openly revealed themselves or their works to the world. This book is the first exception in probably 12,000 years. Disbelief stems from not understanding, ignorance. Anything which is not true cannot be understood, that is, it does not make sense. All true things must make sense. All true things must be in accordance with what we know about nature and the universe, that is to say that they are natural. Nothing true can be unnatural, because nature is everything, and so nothing is outside of nature. Things that cannot be understood do not exist, they are lies, and therefore against nature. All things that exist are in accordance with nature, so all things that are true are in accordance with nature. The art of alchemy is only the imitation and acceleration of nature, so it is not possible to say that alchemy is untrue under this definition. This would be the same as saying that nature is untrue. So the definition of alchemy is self-supporting as it only claims something based on what we already know to be true. Alchemy is the imitation and acceleration of nature. We know that nature is true, so alchemy must also be true. The only argument here is if you don't believe that alchemy is an imitation and acceleration of nature, but now you have this book, so you cannot complain that no one explained this to you. Any truth must be in accordance with nature, understandable, logical, and it must make sense. If you believe something that does not fit this category, then your belief is only ignorance. All true things are understandable. You may still object to the concept that nature, i.e. alchemy, can produce a stone capable of the powers described in the previous chapter. The explanation of why this is the case is so simple that it is difficult to explain, as it is obvious. And who can explain something to someone who fails to see what is directly in front of their eyes on a daily basis? It is nature that is the force which operates on this universe. It created us, we are here, we are alive. Nature already created all the gold in the world. How can one accept the ability of nature to create life and then dismiss the ability to prolong it? How can one accept the ability of nature to make gold and then dismiss this in the same sentence? We know that nature creates life, we know that nature creates gold. Alchemy is the imitation and acceleration of nature, so these things can be achieved with the art of alchemy. To summarize, if nature can give life, we can give life. If nature can make gold, we can make gold. Nature does it every day, so who are you to say it is impossible when it is before your very eyes? There are people who can read this book and not understand it, but the reason for this is not that what is written here is too complicated for these people, but that it is too simple for these people. The disbelievers are so inflated with their own egotistic vanity that they are unable to see truth even when it walks right up to them and slaps them across the face. These are the same people who walk around claiming to understand quantum theory, string theory, etc. Even when the inventors of those theories claimed not to fully understand it themselves. They are models, not truths. The only argument against alchemy is therefore ignorance. But whatever you believe, it doesn't change the truth. Both among ancients and moderns the question whether alchemy be a real art or a mere imposture has exercised many heads and pens. In the case of a science which is familiarly known to a great body of learned men, the mere fact that they all believe in it supersedes the necessity of proof. But this rule does not apply to the art of alchemy, whose pretensions, therefore, need to be carefully and jealously sifted. The arguments which make against the justice of those claims must be fairly stated, and it will be for the professors of the art to turn back the edge of all adverse reasoning. Every ordinary art, as we learn in the second book of the Physics, is either dispositive of substance, or productive of form, or it teaches the use of something. Our art, however, does not belong to any one of these categories. It may be described indeed as both dispositive and productive, but it does not teach the use of anything. It truly instructs us how to know the one substance exclusively designed by nature for a certain purpose, and it also acquaints us with the natural method of treating and manipulating this substance, a knowledge which may be either practically or speculatively present in the mind of the master. There are other crafts which are not artificial, but natural, such as the arts of medicine, of horticulture, and glass blowing. They are arts insofar as they require an operator, but they are natural insofar as they are based upon facts of nature. Such is the art of alchemy. Some arts systematize the creations of the human mind, as, for instance, those of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, but alchemy does not belong to this class. Yet alchemy resembles other arts in the following respect, that its practice must be preceded by theory and investigation, for before we can know how to do a thing, we must understand all the conditions and circumstances under which it is produced. If we rightly apprehend the cause or causes of a thing, for there often is a multiplicity or complication of causes, we also know how to produce that thing. But it must further be considered that no one can claim to be heard in regard to the truth or falsity of this art who does not clearly understand the matter at issue, and we may lay it down as a rule that those who set up as judges of this question without a clear insight into the conditions of the controversy should be regarded as persons who are talking wildly and at random. Aristotle, in the Dialectics, says that every master has a right to speak authoritatively with reference to his own art. According to this rule, it is the sages, and the sages only, that ought to be consulted with reference to the truth of alchemy. No man in his senses would deny the truth of alchemy for the very insufficient reason that he himself is ignorant of it. Such a person would be content with the authority of weighty names like Hermes, Hippocrates, and numerous others. There are many reasons why the master conceal this art. But if anyone denies its existence on the ground that he is ignorant of it, he is like someone who has been shut up all his life in a certain house, and therefore denies that the world extends beyond the four walls of his habitation. There is not really any need to advance any arguments to establish the actuality of our art, for the art itself is the best proof of its own existence, and being securely lodged in the stronghold of knowledge, we might safely despise the contradiction of the ignorant. In all operative sciences, as Aristotle sets forth, the truth of a proposition ought to be sown, not by logical argument, but by ocular demonstration. The appeal should be not to the intellect, but to the senses. For particulars belong to the domain of sense, while universals belong to the domain of reason. If we are unable to convey to anyone an ocular proof of our art, this fact must not be regarded as casting a slur on our veracity. The difficulty of our task is enhanced by the circumstance that we have to speak of our art to the ignorant and scornful, and are thus in the position of a painter who should attempt to explain nice shades and differences of color to the color blind, or of a musician who should discourse sweet harmony to the deaf. Everyone, says Aristotle, is able to form a correct opinion only of those things which are familiarly and accurately known to him, but he who denies that snow is white cannot have any eyes in his head. How can anyone discover the truth in regard to any science, if he lacks the sense to distinguish the special province of matter, or the material relations, with which that science deals? Such people need to exercise faith even to become aware of the existence of our art. Pythagoras, in the Turba Philosophorum, says that those who are acquainted with the elements will not be numbered among deniers. A doctor who desires to prove that a certain medicine will produce a certain effect in a diseased condition of the human body, must substantiate his position by practical experiment. For instance, someone suffers from a superabundance of red color in the veins of the stomach and liver, and I say that the cure is an evacuation after digestion. If I wished to discover what medicine would produce this effect, I would say, everything that, after digestion, produces an evacuation of bile, will heal the patient. Now, I know that rhubarb or scammania will produce this effect. Therefore, rhubarb or scammania will be the right remedy to choose. Nevertheless, the truth of my assertion could be satisfactorily proven only by means of a practical experiment. In all these matters, as Hamek says, nothing short of seeing a thing will help you to know it. If you wish to know that pepper is hot and that vinegar is cooling, that colocynth and absinthe are bitter, that honey is sweet, and that aconite is poison, that the magnet attracts steel, that arsenic whitens brass, and that tutia turns it of an orange color, you will, in every one of these cases, have to verify the assertion by experience. It is the same in geometry, astronomy, music, perspective, and other sciences with a practical scope and aim. A like rule applies with double force to alchemy, which undertakes to transmute the base metals into gold and silver. Whatsoever has the power to transmute imperfect and complete metals has the power to make gold and silver. Now, this quality is possessed by the stone which the philosophers make known to us. It is plain that there are but two perfect metals, namely, gold and silver, just as there are but two perfect luminaries, namely, sun and moon. The other metals are imperfect and incomplete, and whosoever educes them to perfection, the same also converts them into gold and silver. The truth and justice of this claim, like all other propositions of a practical nature, has to be demonstrated by a practical experiment, and in no other way can it be satisfactorily shown. But such a practical demonstration would, on the other hand, once for all put an end to the controversy, and convincingly demonstrate to every well-regulated mind the truth of the art by which it is accomplished. Find our art, says Galen, and you will have proved its reality, which is performed not by the first principles of the art, but by its operations. It is absurd to prove the existence of nature, or to argue the possibility of what is known. Those who are ignorant of any science are like the spectators who can distinguish neither the persons nor their gestures on the stage. A blind man might as well discourse about colors, and criticize the merits of a picture. A deaf man might as well set up as a judge of some musical composition, as an uninformed person presume to deliver judgment on the claims of the art of alchemy. When, indeed, the stone is found, our friends, who now laugh and sneer at us, will be at a loss how to express their love. The New Pearl of Great Price, by Peter Bonus, 1338 AD. To some foolish and shallow persons I have several times expounded this art in the simplest manner, and even word for word, but they despised it only, and would not believe me. The Golden Tract concerning the Stone of the Philosophers, by an anonymous German philosopher, 16th-17th Ken. For the matter is only one thing, and would remain one thing, though 100,000 books had been written about it, because this art is so great a treasure that the whole world would not be a sufficient compensation for it. It is described in obscure terms, yet openly named by all, and known to all. But if all knew its secret, no one would work, and it would lose its value. On this account it would be impious to describe it in universally intelligible language. He to whom God will reveal it, may understand these dark expressions. But because most men do not understand them, they are inclined to regard our art as impossible, and the sages are branded as wicked men and swindlers. Learned doctors, who thus speak of us, have it before their eyes every day, but they do not understand it, because they never attend to it. And then, forsooth, they deny the possibility of finding the stone, nor will anyone ever be able to convince them of the reality of our art, so long as they blindly follow their own bent and inclination. In short, they are too wise to discern it, since it transcends the range of the human intellect, and must be humbly received at the hand of God. It is their own ignorance, the skeptics, that prevents them from attaining to a true knowledge, but they put the blame on our writings, and call us charlatans and impostors. They argue that if the stone could be found at all, they must have discovered it long ago, their eyes being as keen and their minds as acute as they are. Behold, say they, how we have toiled day and night, how many books we have read, how many years we have spent in our laboratories. Surely if there were anything in this art, it could not have escaped us. By speaking thus, they only exhibit their own presumption and folly. They themselves have no eyes, and they make that an argument for blaspheming our high and holy art. Hermes is right in saying that our art is true, and has been rightly handed down by the sages. All doubts concerning it have arisen through false interpretation of the mystic language of the philosophers. But, since they are loath to confess their own ignorance, their readers prefer to say that the words of the sages are imposture and falsehood. The fault really lies with the ignorant reader, who does not understand the style of the philosophers. If, in the interpretation of our books, they would suffer themselves to be guided by the teaching of nature, rather than by their own foolish notions, they would not miss the mark so hopelessly. The glory of the world, or, Table of Paradise, by Anonymous, 1526 AD. I, being an anonymous adept, a lover of learning, and a philosopher, have decreed to write this little treatise of medicinal, chemical, and physical arcana, in the year 1645 after the birth of Christ, and in the 23rd year of my age, to assist in conducting my straying brethren out of the labyrinth of error, and with the further object of making myself known to other sages, holding aloft a torch which may be visible far and wide to those who are groping in the darkness of ignorance. The contents of this book are not fables, but real experiments which I have seen, touched, and handled, as an adept will easily conclude from these lines. I have written more plainly about this art than any of my predecessors. Sometimes I have found myself on the very verge of breaking my vow, and once or twice had to lay down my pen for a season. But I could not resist the inward prompting of God, which impelled me to persevere in the most loving course, who alone knows the heart, and to whom only be glory forever. Hence, I undoubtedly gather that in this last age of the world, many will become blessed by this arcanum, through what I have thus faithfully written, for I have not willingly left anything doubtful to the young beginner. I know many who with me do enjoy this secret, and am persuaded that many more will also rejoice in its possession. Let the holy will of God perform what it pleases, though I confess myself an unworthy instrument through whom such great things should be effected. An open entrance to the closed palace of the king, by an anonymous sage and lover of truth, 1645 AD. Among those who devote themselves to the transmutation of metals, however, there can be no such thing as mediocrity of attainment. A man who studies this art must have either everything or nothing. An alchemist who knows only half his craft reaps nothing but disappointment and waste of time and money. Moreover, he lays himself open to the mockery of those who despise our art. Those, indeed, who succeed in reaching the goal of the magistery, have not only infinite riches, but the means of continued life and health. Hence it is the most popular of all human pursuits. Anyone who has read a few receipts claims the title of a sage, and conceives the most extravagant hopes, and, in order to give themselves the appearance of very wise men indeed, such persons immediately set themselves to construct furnaces, fill their laboratories with stills and alembics, and approach the work with a wonderful appearance of profundity. They adopt an obscure jargon, speak of the first matter of the metals, and discuss with a learned air the rotation of the elements, and the marriage of Gabricius with Bega. In the meantime, however, they do not succeed in bringing about any metamorphosis of the metals, except that of their gold and silver into copper and bronze. When captious despisers of our art see this, they draw from such constant failures the conclusion that our art is a combination of fiction and imposture, whilst those who have ruined themselves by their folly confirm this suspicion by preying on the credulity of others, pretending to have gained some skill by the loss of their money. In this way the path of the beginner is beset with difficulties and pestilent delusions of every kind. And, through the fault of these swindlers, who give themselves such wonderful airs of profundity and learning, our art itself has fallen into utter disrepute, though these persons, of course, know nothing whatever about it. The beginner finds it extremely difficult to distinguish between the false and the true in this vast labyrinth of alchemy. It is possible indeed that some dull person may allege in refutation of our reasoning his inability to accomplish those chemical transformations on which it is based, but such operators would be vindicating too great an honor for their ignorance if they claimed to advance it as an argument against the truth of our art. They must not make their own little understandings the standard or measure of the possibilities of nature. At any rate, my word is as good as theirs, and better, since they can never prove a negative, and I do most positively and solemnly assert that I have with my own hands performed every one of the experiments which I have described, and I know many others whose experience has shown these things to be true. How can our opponents hope to prevail against eyewitnesses by bare negation? Study nature, read the books of genuine sages, who are neither impostors nor jealous churls, and study them day and night. Let him not be too eager to carry out every idea practically before he has thoroughly tested it, and found it to be in harmony not only with the teaching of all the sages, but also of nature herself. Not until then let him gird himself for the practical part of the work, and let him constantly modify his operations until he sees the signs which are described by the sages. Nor let him despair though he take many false steps, for the greatest philosophers have learned most by their mistakes. The Metamorphosis of Metals, by Irenaeus Philolethes, 1694 AD. But why is it called a stone, though it is not a stone, and how is it to be found? The sages describe it as being a stone and not a stone, and the vulgar, who cannot imagine how so wonderful a thing should be produced except by art magic, decry our science as impious, wicked, and diabolical. Some silly persons clamor for an act making the profession or practice of this art punishable by statute law. Now, one can hardly be angry with the illiterate and ignorant persons who raise this cry. But when it is taken up by men of exalted station and profound learning, one hardly knows what to say. These men I also reckon among the rude multitude, because they are deplorably ignorant of everything pertaining to our art, and yet, forgetful of their dignity, they join in the hue and cry against it, like so many cowardly village curs. It is neither religious nor wise to judge that of which you know nothing, and yet that is exactly what these people do, who claim to be both Christians and scholars. A Brief Guide to the Celestial Ruby, by Irenaeus Philolethes, 1694 AD. After spending the best part of my life in the study of the liberal arts and sciences, and in the company of wise men and judicious scholars, I was compelled, as the result of my observation of mankind, to arrive at the melancholy conclusion that the hearts of most persons are set either on ambitious and vainglorious projects, on sensual pleasures, or on the accumulation of wealth by all and any means, and that few care either for God or for virtue. At first I did not quite know whether to become a disciple of the laughing or of the weeping philosopher, or whether to join in the exclamation of the wise prince of Israel, "All things are vanity." But at length the Bible and experience taught me to take refuge in the study of the hidden secrets of nature, whether pursued at home, by means of books, or abroad, in the great volume of the world. Now, the more I drank of the mighty fount of knowledge, the more painfully my thirst, like that of Tantalus, seemed to increase. I had heard that there was a bird called Ph and Nix, the only one of its kind in the whole world, whose feathers and flesh constitute the great and glorious medicine for all passion, pain, and sorrow, which also Helena, after her return from Troy, had presented in the form of a draught to Telemachus, who thereupon had forgotten all his sorrows and troubles. This bird I could not indeed hope to obtain entire, but I was seized with an irresistible longing to become possessed of at least one of its smallest feathers, and for this unspeakable privilege I was prepared to spend all my substance, to travel far and wide, and to endure every hardship. There was, of course, much to discourage me. Some people denied the very existence of this bird, others laughed at my faith in its wonder-working properties. But most of those whom I met laughed at my quest, and said that, like Narcissus, I had fallen in love with the shadow of my own mind, the echo of my vain and ambitious thoughts, which had no substantial existence apart from my own folly. The words of the alchemists, said they, are like clouds. They may mean and represent anything, according to the fancy of him who hears them. And even if there was such a medicine, human life is too brief for the search. All that makes life worth living will have to be neglected and thrust aside while you are engaged in hunting after it. If we can pick up a knowledge of this secret casually, and whilst devoting ourselves to other pursuits, well, but if not, we can very ill spare the time for a closer search. These objections, at least the latter half of them, I met as follows: the quest of this medicine demands the whole powers of a man's body and mind. He who engages in it only casually, cannot hope to penetrate even the outward rind of knowledge. The object of our search is a profound secret, and a man who is not prepared to give himself wholly to this inquiry had much better abstain from it altogether. A subtle allegory concerning the secrets of alchemy, by Michael Mayer, 1617 AD. I have, in the course of my life, met with a good many who fancied that they had a perfect understanding of the writings of the sages, but their subtle style of interpretation was in glaring contrast with the simplicity of nature, and they laughed at what they were pleased to call the rustic crudeness of my remarks. I have also frequently attempted to explain our art to others by word of mouth, but though they called themselves sages, they would not believe that there is such water in our sea, and attributed my remarks to temporary insanity. The New Chemical Light, by Michael Sendivogius, 17th Ken. And because the philosophers had so obscurely set forth this science in strange involvings of words and shadows of figures, the stone of the philosophers was doubted by a very many men. Tell me by the immortal God, what is more unjust than for men to hate what they are ignorant of? And then if the thing do deserve hatred, what is of all things more shallow? What more abject, or what greater madness and pottage is there, than to condemn that science in which you have concerned yourself just nothing at? Who hast never learned either nature or the majesty of nature, or the property or the occult operations of metals? The counsellor also babbles and croaks, and the petty foggers of the law, the greatest haters of philosophy, who with the hammer of a venal tongue coin themselves money out of the tears of the miserable, who shipping over the most sacred of laws, have by the intricacies of their expositions persecuted all the world with their frauds. But why do I go after jeers and satires? Let these crabbed fellows and their followers remain perpetually in their opinion, who know nothing. Which is honest, which is pleasant, which is delightful, which lastly is anything elevated above a vulgar doctrine, and who have attained at nothing glorious and famous, but perhaps at some plebeian business from the black sons of Cadamus. But to which purpose are these? I have made the choice of this stone of the philosophers familiar to me, and I very often call it the only Minerva, and the greatest pearl of all occult philosophy, or of magic, not indeed of the superstitious, but of the natural. Yet it seems in the opinion of the unlearned to degenerate far from a better study, which is decreed and ordained by the divine will. Book of the Chemical Art, by Marsilius Ficinus, 15th Ken. Permit me to transcribe a passage from the works of Helmontius, Arbor v. E. Folio 630. I cannot but believe that there is such a thing as a gold and silver making stone. At the same time, I cannot shut my eyes to the fact that hundreds of painstaking alchemists are daily being led astray by impostors or ignorant professors of the spagyric art. For this reason I shall not be astonished if, immediately upon perusing my book, multitudes of these deluded victims start up, and contradict the assertion which I have made in regard to the truth of this art. One of these gentry denounces alchemy as a work of the devil, another describes it as sheer nonsense and humbug, a third admits the possibility of transmuting metals into gold, but maintains that the whole process costs more money than it is worth. But I do not wonder at these opinions. It is a hackneyed saying of human nature that we gape at those things whose purpose we do not understand, but we investigate things pleasurable to know. The sages should therefore remember the words of Seneca, De Moribus, you are not yet blessed, if the multitude does not laugh at you. But I do not care whether they believe or contradict my teaching about the transmutation of metals. I rest calmly satisfied in the knowledge that I have seen it with my own eyes, and performed it with my own hands. Even in our degenerate age these wonders are still possible. Even now the medicine is prepared which is worth 20 tons of gold, nay, more, for it has virtue to bestow that which all the gold of the world cannot buy, viz., health. Blessed is that physician who knows our soothing medicinal potion of mercury, the great panacea of death and disease. But God does not reveal this glorious knowledge to all men indiscriminately, and some men are so obtuse, with a judicial blindness, that they wonder at the activity of the simplest forces of nature, as, for instance, the attractive power which the magnet exercises upon the steel. But, whether they believe it or not, there is a corresponding magnetic force in gold which attracts mercury, in silver which attracts copper, and so with all other metals, minerals, stones, herbs, plants, etc. We must not be surprised at this persistent opposition to truth. The light of the sun pains the eyes of owls. Belief or unbelief could not make any difference to the truth of our art, just as a magnet would go on attracting steel, and rendering it magnetic by such contact, even if you did not credit it. Golden Calf, by John Frederick Helvetius, 17th Ken. Of the numerous things in the world, the art and the Tao are the most difficult to comprehend. How then can people of ordinary endowment pass the judgment that there cannot possibly be a way to immortality? If one harbors doubts about the Tao merely because of popular disbelief, then he is assuming the mass to be wise people. How numerous then will the wise ones in this world be? Furthermore, those who understand the Tao and work for its attainment, are they not the most stupid, even more stupid than the common people? Many fear to attempt to seek for immortality, lest they should fail and expose themselves to ridicule as victims of folly and deception. But supposing that the common people are not infallible and that their idea about the Tao is one mistake they make among 10,000 sound judgments, will not those who have laughed be laughed at by the ones who succeed despite discouragement and ridicule? Even the sun and moon cannot shine on everything. How can the people's mind be so omniscient as to be entirely trustworthy? On the Gold Medicine and on the Yellow and the White, by Ko Hung, 4th Ken. Chinese. Because many have written of the Philosopher's Stone without any knowledge of the art, and the few books extant, written by our learned predecessors and true masters hereupon, are either lost or concealed in the collections of such, however despised, as are lovers and seekers of natural secrets, we have taken a resolution to communicate our knowledge in this matter, to the intent that those who are convinced the philosophical work is no fiction, but grounded in the possibility of nature, may be faithfully directed in their studies, and have an undoubted criterion to distinguish between such authors as are genuine sons of science and those who are spurious, as writing by hearsay only. So bewildered is human ingenuity, when it leaves the beaten track of truth and nature, to entangle itself in a multiplicity of fine-spun inventions. The searcher of nature will rejoice greatly in this discovery, as grounded in reason and sound philosophy, but to fools it would be in vain, should even wisdom herself cry out in the streets. Wherefore, leaving such persons to hug themselves in their own imaginary importance, we shall go on. On the Philosopher's Stone, by Anonymous, 12th-17th Ken. 6. Interpretations. Art has no haters but the ignorant. A Golden and Blessed Casket of Nature's Marvels, by Benedictus Figulus, 1607 AD. The alchemical writings are obscure and often misinterpreted. Since the writings are so obscure, it's a perfect discipline for someone who wants to look more important than they are to pretend to understand. As long as no one else understands it either, then they can safely go on misleading people and pretending to be important and mystical. I want to make it clear that there is only one correct interpretation. I will discuss some common alternative interpretations and misunderstandings in this chapter. The modern popular opinion is that alchemy is a spiritual discipline. This idea arose in the 19th and early 20th centuries, along with the Theosophical movement and the cult revival. The reason for its popularity was simply because it was a way for people who don't understand the obscure terms to pretend that they do understand them. These people proceeded to write books themselves on spiritual alchemy, which are mere folly. The spiritual interpretation of alchemy that was made famous by Jung in fact reflects religious convictions typical of 19th century occultism and is not supported by the antique and medieval alchemical sources. On the Edge of the Future, by Jeffrey John Kripal and Glenn W. Schuck, 2005. Spiritual alchemy only became believable when the Philosopher's Stone was no longer believed in. Prior to the 19th century, no single person ever wrote anything about alchemy being spiritual. This only started when alchemy fell into disrepute. It was clear to many self-styled philosophers in the 19th century that alchemy had been praised and studied by so many great minds throughout history. The only way to explain this was to 1. Either admit that they were not wise enough to work out how to make the stone, or 2. Pretend that they were wise enough by inventing an alternative interpretation. Spiritual alchemy appeared to make sense of the writings of the alchemists, assuming that the Philosopher's Stone is not real, and only if one were to read selectively just a few alchemical books. The way of the spiritual interpreters is to find any word that could sound spiritual, such as spirit, body, living gold, philosophical mercury, etc. They then jump on this word as evidence of their claim, even though it is evident that these words refer to either the water or salt of the substance from which we make the stone. Unfortunately, many alchemical classics were adulterated during the 19th century, e.g. Corpus Hermeticum, in order to make them sound more spiritual. At the same time, new spiritual alchemy books were published under the name of older alchemists, when they were in fact new publications. Although it is easy to tell the cultural origin of books by the style of writing, these books continue to fool people and are used as sources to support the spiritual interpretation. Hundreds of books, including adulterated translations of alchemical classics, appeared in the second half of the 19th century, all but a very few embracing this new, spiritual interpretation of alchemy. Newton and Newtonianism, by James E. Force and Sarah Hutton, 2005. The spiritual interpreters go further by suggesting that the alchemists had to hide their spiritual philosophy under obscurity, since the kings and the church in their time would have prosecuted them for blasphemy. This claim sounds believable if we are to read it and nod our heads without thinking about it. But if we think about it, we see that 1. Various saints and monks in the same period spoke very clearly about spirituality without any problem. 2. The kings and church were actually prosecuting the alchemists anyway. 3. Since the alchemists were already being prosecuted for claiming they can make gold, all they would have to do is admit they were actually talking about spirituality and they would be safe. A purely spiritual alchemy would never explain the existence of alchemical laboratories in which physicians honestly and fanatically sought for occult medicines. Man, Myth and Magic, by Richard Cavendish and Brian Innes, 1983. Spiritual alchemy is the emperor's new clothes. Everyone pretends to understand it, but no one really does. There is nobody on earth who could explain the why and how of spiritual alchemy and successfully decode entire alchemical books using this interpretation. This is why the idea has stuck, simply because no one understands it, and so there is no argument against those who believe it, as how can you argue against someone who blindly believes something with no evidence? That being said, since the creation of the Philosopher's Stone does follow fundamental laws of nature, and since fundamental laws hold true on every level and every situation, then the same laws which apply to the creation of the stone also hold true to spiritual development. But the spiritual interpreters of alchemy don't follow those fundamental laws, since they don't understand alchemy, and so they are still wrong. My argument against the spiritual interpretations is not that alchemy does not apply to spirituality, of course it does. But my argument is against the concept that alchemy is primarily spiritual. Alchemy is primarily concerned with the physical reality, and all the authors of the alchemy books were writing about a physical substance, which is easy to see from the quotes provided in this book. However, all fundamental truths apply on every level, and since the physical reality is a reflection of the spiritual reality, then of course the same does apply to both levels. If the spiritual interpreters of alchemy actually understood alchemy, then they would understand this, and therefore understand that the authors were writing about a physical substance. This is my point. Other people are indeed convinced that alchemy is practical, but they just can't get their head around the fact that it's very simple and follows the laws of nature. Many people have invented chemical processes, e.g., the white stone of urine, which they developed by reading only one or two alchemical books and taking the metaphorical parts of the writings literally. From reading alchemy, they invent complicated chemical processes, which are far away from the actions of nature, and set about doing all kinds of fruitless experiments. They obviously get nowhere, and then decide to tell everyone else how to go wrong too, the emperor's new clothes again. I should say a few words about ORMUS, also called ORMS or white power gold, which many people are describing and marketing as the Philosopher's Stone, and I have been asked many times if I am talking about the same thing. ORMUS is a method to obtain very small particles of charged metals. This is not the stone, and it is not alchemy, it is not imitating nature. There may well be health benefits to ingesting ORMUS, but the claim made that ORMUS is the stone is a little silly. It's like calling a chicken a cow. A chicken is not a cow, it doesn't look like a cow, and it doesn't act like a cow. ORMUS is not made like the stone, it doesn't look like the stone, it doesn't act like the stone. It's not the stone. There is no reason whatsoever for anyone to believe that ORMUS is the same as the stone, other than this is what they have previously been told, and if what I am saying here applies to you, then you need to consider what you believe, who you are listening to, and whether you should continue to base your beliefs on the opinions of others presented with no evidence to support their claims. It is very easy to tell if a procedure is true or not. You just ask yourself the following questions. 1. Do I understand how it works? 2. Do I understand why it works? 3. Does it follow the cycles and laws of nature? If the answer is yes to all these questions, then you're on to something. Nature is the grandmaster of alchemy and the true teacher, so it is nature to whom you must look to if you intend to base your beliefs on truths. My words in this book will mean nothing to you unless you can sacrifice a little bit of ego and look to nature to see what is true and what is false. Nature has nothing to learn from us, but we have so much to learn from nature. To accept this enables us to listen to what nature has to say, which is all around us, and nature is never wrong. If the interpretation is wrong, then it won't fit, and so you know it's wrong. If one wants to write about spiritual development or chemistry, then this is all fine and dandy. But don't go calling it alchemy. I even came across a modern alchemy book in which the reader is asked not to read the old alchemy books because they're too obscure and will only confuse you. Notwithstanding, the reader is warned against haphazard reading of alchemical books, for this will lead to mental confusion, and finally desperation of ever learning anything. Once started on alchemical research, however, this becomes a great temptation and a bad fault. One tends to read voraciously any alchemical book that comes to hand. This one book, closely studied, is however all that is necessary for practical experiment. This is impressively ignorant. It looks to me that this author just wants to look cool and mystical, and of course they know that they got nowhere, but they're happy to deceive others and pretend they're important. I apologize to the author, whose name I won't mention, for writing against you, but I hope you've learned your lesson. A man who fails to recognize the Wu Xing 5 elements and the 4 signs is certainly one who will be befuddled to differentiate cinnabar, mercury, lead, and silver. He has never even heard of the principle of the fire and the season for compounding tan, and he dares to say that he is a great devotee of Taoism. Never considering his mistake, he teaches others in turn, and teaches mistakenly. He ruins the mercury of others by misleading them into an uncharted port. How can one have the heart to do this? Wu Chen Pian, Essay on the Understanding of Truth, by Changpo Tuan, 1078 AD, Chinese. With the correct interpretation, as I present. In this book, you will understand 1. What alchemy is, 2. Why it works, and 3. How it works. No other interpretation can give you this. They only rely on blind faith, since that is the only way to believe a lie. Notice how I can back up any statement I make in regards to alchemical theory and practice with several quotes from a variety of alchemical books. You will not find this with any other interpretation. Notice how I explain not only how alchemy works, but why alchemy works. Notice how you can actually understand what I say, and it makes sense with nature. This is what truth looks like, but it's been so long since many people have seen truth that they've forgotten what it looks like. It is of course all inevitable that the stone would be forgotten and the books misinterpreted, and I don't really mind these misinterpretations in a way, since I had no problem understanding the real alchemical books, which I read before any of the modern literature. But the purpose of my little rant here is to put a stop to further disinformation and lies.